Good afternoon. In my sermon yesterday, I talked about worship, about how worship pervades our entire being and fills all of creation. Today, I'd like to take a slightly different perspective on what happens during worship. And to do so, I'd like to look at the philosophy of a man named Michael Polanyi. Polanyi was a Hungarian chemist who shifted his career midlife and began to explore the field of epistemology. That's the branch of philosophy that studies the way we get to know things. For example, Polanyi challenged the concept that science only follows the facts. He argued that the scientific approach and the conclusions that scientists reach are colored by their preconceptions. And he also championed a concept called tacit knowing, the fact that we know things without even being aware that we know them. Polanyi also turned his attention to religion, even though people aren't sure if he was actually a believer himself or not. But I was struck by one remark that he made. He wrote, "I have described Christian religious service as a framework of clues which are apt to induce a passionate search for God." In other words, our Christian faith provides us with clues about God, and those clues are tantalizing enough that they motivate us to search for Him and to learn more about Him. So, just as experimental data help scientists solve riddles about the world around us, in the same way, worship helps us believers solve the riddle about who God is. For Polanyi, that's what worship is all about. Worship is a searching for God. Again, this is something he wrote. The Christian inquiry is worship. The words of prayer and confession, the actions of the ritual, the lesson, the sermon, the church itself are the clues of the worshiper's striving towards God. They guide his craving for the divine presence. In other words, worship is more than enjoying being in the presence of God. Worship is more than lifting up praise to God. Worship is more than offering ourselves to the Lord. Worship is more than receiving instruction or challenge or comfort for the living of life. In addition to all these things, which are also reasons why we may worship, but in addition to all of these things, according to Polanyi, worship is also a search for God. It is a chasing after clues. This flips the concept of worship upside down. It doesn't mean that we worship God because we know Him and love Him and want to serve Him, or it doesn't mean only that we worship God because we know Him and love Him and want to serve Him. We also worship because we want to know more about who God is. And this is a whole new way of learning about God and His will for our lives and His presence in our world. Typically, we might think, well, you learn about God by reading the Bible, or by praying, or by studying what theologians and other Christian leaders teach us about God. But have you ever stopped to consider that the worship service is an opportunity for us to learn about who God is? And I'm not talking about learning through, for example, the instruction in the sermon or even the words in the hymns that might describe God. I'm talking about the act of worship itself revealing who God is. By participating in the singing and the praying and the confessing and the sharing of the sacraments and everything else we do in worship, by doing these things, we discover who God is. And that doesn't mean that we'll come away with some insight that we can describe with words to say who God is. In fact, it is the exact opposite. It is the kind of knowing about God that you can't put into words. Perhaps worship is like watching a sunset or the waves on the ocean. Oh, you can learn all the concepts about why colors appear in the sky. You might learn the facts about sea currents. You might even study pictures of sunsets and ocean waves. You might interview experts about the sunset and the ocean. But until you actually gaze up at the sky, or until you actually stand on the beach, you don't really know what a sunset is. You don't really know what ocean waves are. It's like the old saying, I guess you had to be there. And that's what worship is. Worship is being there and discovering the God that you find when you are. Would you pray with me, please? God, there is an urge within each of us that seeks to know who you are. And we're grateful for the many ways in which we can learn concepts about who you are. We're grateful for experiences we have when we sense your presence. May that be what worship is for us, O God. May we worship, seeking for the clues that we find in worship that reveal who you are. And may that understanding of who you are lead us to greater devotion and, yes, even more worship. Amen. Thanks for joining me. We'll talk again later.